Hey everybody, and welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to be talking about my June TBR, and I have been laughingly calling this TBR in my head the not like other TBRs because this is the month that I have decided to round up all of the books that I have that don't get talked about a lot on BookTube, because I, like so many people who watch BookTube, I'm sure, find it really difficult not to get caught up in the hype. When people are talking about a book or talking about a series and saying that they loved it and it was amazing and you should go out and buy it, I want to. I love reading books that other people have enjoyed because we have a limited amount of time to read and a limited number of books that we can read every year. And so I like knowing that people whose opinions I trust have read something and enjoyed it. And that helps me curate a list of books that I also want to enjoy. However, through random literary lists or obscure recommendations or impulse buys at the bookstore, I do have a collection of books that don't get talked about as much on BookTube that I really want to read. And some of these made it onto my 22 books you have to read in 2022 list, and some of them are books that are kind of part of ongoing series that I haven't heard a lot of people talk about. And I thought that June would be a nice month to get all that, scoop it up into one big TBR, and then hopefully have lots of books to talk about over the next month or so that maybe you haven't heard as many people talk about on BookTube. Now, that being said, in a hilarious turn of events that always seem to happen in my videos, the first book that I have to talk about is definitely one that you have heard on BookTube, because this is the channel buddy read for June. If you have been following along with the channel for a little while, you know that I shooed buddy reads in May, and it worked out really nicely. I had a great time just reading whatever I wanted to read, and it was very low stress and made me want to read more. But I do love doing the channel read along, and so from June onward, I have reinstated that. And the book that got selected as our pick for June is Legends and Lattes by, I think the author's name is Travis Baldry. But this is a book that I believe Patrick was the first person to kind of put this on everybody's radar, but I have since seen Joanna and Andrew over at Andrew's Wizardly Reads and a bunch of other people read it and really enjoy it. This, from what I can tell from everybody's review, seems to be a very wholesome, comforting, warm fantasy novel that is about a couple who opens a coffee shop, a fantasy coffee shop. So I'm looking forward to it. There were a couple of books that people were really keen to read on the channel, but this was one of the shorter ones. And as I'm just coming off of this high of not overscheduling myself for buddy reads, I thought that I would restart the channel read-alongs with a shorter pick. So I'm really looking forward to Legends and Lattes. I hope that I enjoy it as much as everybody else has. The other read-along announcement that is coming is exciting because it's actually a read-along that my husband wants to do. So he notoriously will not read the books that I want to read, and so we don't end up overlapping a whole lot unless he really likes something and I feel like it's gonna work for me, then I will read it. But he has agreed to join in for a buddy read of the new Jedi Order series. So my husband Andrew is a really big fan of the expanded, I think it's expanded for Star Wars, the expanded universe, or the EU. All of the books that were originally part of the Star Wars canon, and we won't go there, but the extended Star Wars books. And New Jedi Order is apparently supposed to be one of the really, really good series, and he actually hasn't read it. So he's read a lot of the EU, but for whatever reason had never gotten around to reading the New Jedi Order. So I think the plan on the channel is to read the first book in June, and then try to read 2 books a month going forward, because I believe there are 19 books in this series, and I think they're all fairly short and easy to get through. I don't know if I will maintain that pace. I am fully committed to reading this first one. I am happy to open the chat. I hope that people join in and want to read it, and I'm looking forward to all of that. We will see what happens with me and how many of these I am going to read. But the very first one is called Vector Prime, and it's actually written by R.A. Salvatore, so that's exciting. I talked about the Drizzt series on the channel back in December for Andrew's birthday, actually, because that's one of his favorite fantasy series. And so it's exciting that we will start reading this series together with a Star Wars book written by R.A. Salvatore. So those are the two buddy reads for the channel, and books that, more people have talked about / heard about, I'm sure. And now we will get into the strange assortment of like random books that I have on this TBR that have just been sitting in my house for a period of time. And the first one is called Tooth and Claw by Jo Walton. So this is a very small fantasy book, both in terms of page count and size. Like, it's a very tiny little hardcover book. It's really cute, actually. And I think, judge me not, but I think I heard of this book when I read Midnight Sun, which was Stephenie Meyer's like re-release of Twilight from Edward's point of view. I think Bella was reading this book and I was like, what the heck? Like, what is this fantasy book that I haven't heard of? And I searched it up, and kind of the tagline or the selling line is Pride and Prejudice, but the characters are dragons. And I immediately bought it, and I haven't gotten around to reading it, but I'm really, really excited to read it. I hope I love it. I hope it really is Pride and Prejudice with dragons, because that would be amazing, and I am really looking forward to reading it. The next book that I have on the list is one that I picked up when I was recently in St. John's to visit my sister, and it was an absolute cover buy. The book was beautiful, and it's called The Tangleroot Palace by Marjorie Liu. So Marjorie Liu is a comic book author. I think primarily, I don't know if she has any works of fiction because I didn't look into it actually when I picked this up, but I know she writes the series Monstrous, which is really popular. I have not read it, but I have heard good things. And this is a collection of short stories that are fantasy inspired. And I think the way that it was described on the back cover was like frightening tales about frightening women or something. And I was like, well, between this beautiful cover and that line, I feel like this is a collection of short stories that I will really like. I haven't heard anybody talk about it. That doesn't mean that they haven't. I know that this came out a little while ago, so if you have read any of these books and you're like, oh, well, Sarah's on her channel saying no one reads this, then I apologize. I cannot watch everything or remember everything, but within the sphere of booktube that I typically watch, I have not heard a lot of people talk about this short story collection. So I hope that I end up really enjoying it because I love the cover, and it always feels good to, impulsively buy a book and then have that turn out for the best. The next book is one that is part of a continuing series, and this is The Splinter King by, I believe it's Mike Brooks. So I read the first book in this series last year, and I gave it, I don't remember if it was 3 or 3.5 stars. It was a multi-POV fantasy story that I thought did some really interesting things with culture. It was about two rival cultures coming together, but instead of conflict, the main driving force of the story is that they actually have to learn together, or learn to live together, to combat this bigger malevolent force that is coming after them. And there was a lot of tension, a lot of strain. We got to see the differences in how they approached different things like language and relationships and sexuality and belief systems, and how they had to try to work together to fit into one society made up of people who sometimes had very contrasting beliefs. And so even though there were some parts of the story that I didn't love, I thought that was a really interesting and unique angle to take, and I definitely wanted to continue along with this series. I didn't love it enough to kind of go out and pick up the second book as soon as it hit the shelves, but I do want to continue, and I listened to the first one on audio, so I think I will make this my audiobook experience for June. The first one was fairly long, so I'm assuming that this one will be fairly lengthy as well, and that audiobook will probably carry me through most of the month of June. So that is the plan right now for my listening in June. And then after that, this is a book that I've had on my shelf for a couple of years, I think before I even moved out of St. John's / finished residency. So it's been a couple of years that I have had this, and it's called The Bird King by G. Willow Wilson. And this is a book that I know almost nothing about. I bought it because I had read G. Willow Wilson's debut novel, which was called Aleph the Unseen, which was this weird science fantasy, really, blend of Middle Eastern mythology and computer hacking. And I just thought it was so cool and so fresh when I read it. I haven't talked about it a lot on the channel because, to be honest, I don't feel like I remember enough about it to do it justice, but I did really like it. And I think if I look back on Goodreads, I probably gave it like a 4 or 5 stars. So I really enjoyed the reading experience at the time. And so when I saw that she had written another book, I picked it up and then never got around to reading it. I believe this one is historical fantasy, and it is set in the 13th century on the Iberian Peninsula. Beyond that, I know very little. I know that there is religious conflict, like that plays a central role in the story, and I think there might be some element of portal fantasy. But again, I have not read this. I picked it up on a whim quite a number of years ago, but I am going to give it a shot, and who knows, maybe it will totally blow me away and I'll have a great new fantasy book that I want to share with everybody and tell them that they have to read. After that are a couple of non-fantasy books. So I have the book Matrix by Lauren Groff, which I have talked about because I think I showed this in a book haul and then talked about it as one of the books that I really wanted to read for 2022. Lauren Groff wrote a work of literary fiction that I really love called Fates and Furies, which is about a marriage and about how difficult it is to truly know the person that you are married to. And it was a story that had a really interesting narrative structure because you got the first half of the story told from one of the spouse's point of view, and then the second half was the same story told from the other spouse's point of view. And it was this kind of interwoven narrative showing how complex issues often get interpreted in different ways by people who are very close to one another, and how that can lead to miscommunication and misunderstanding within those intimate relationships. And I really, really loved it. This is very different. This is historical fiction. I don't even remember what time period it takes place in, but it's about a young woman who I believe is removed from court. She's deemed to be not fit for court and is instead placed as an abbess, like the woman who's running an abbey. And I think that there might be some magical realism elements. I believe she receives visions and then has to interpret those. But in any case, I really loved Lauren Groff's writing style. I loved the way that she explored themes in the other book that I had read by her. And so I am really looking forward to this one. It's a short book. Hopefully it will be engaging. And if anybody has read it, I would love to know whether or not you enjoyed it. The last work of fiction that is on this list is another one that comes from books that I was gifted for Christmas, and this one is called The Robber Girl by Franny Billingsley. This was a book that I purchased because I loved another book by the author so much. She wrote a book called Chime. I don't know if it was 10 years ago now, but it was quite a number of years ago, which was a YA novel that won, I don't remember, I think it might have been the National Book Award, and I found it on one of those like awards tables in the bookstore. Knew nothing about it, took it home, read it, and absolutely loved it. I loved the atmosphere, I loved the writing. I remember as I was reading it that I could see the direction that the plot was taking, and there was a twist at the end that I had known was going to happen, and I remember thinking like, this does not diminish my enjoyment of this book in any way. That is how much I enjoyed the writing and enjoyed the exploration that was done. So I was totally blown away by that book. It was an absolute surprise that year. And so when I saw last year that she was putting out a new book, I immediately wanted to get it. And I am really looking forward to reading it. This one, I believe, is kind of combination of literary mystery with a dash of magical realism. I'm not even going to try to explain what it's about because the synopsis that's given on Goodreads is even very strange and vague. I just know it's about a young girl who goes on a quest and has to, it discovers things about family and purpose and, all those themes that people love to weave into literary fiction. But I've really loved her writing in the past, and I am going to go in there hopeful that I am going to really enjoy this one as well. The last book on the list is a work of nonfiction. This is a little bit of an older book, and I actually snagged it from my friend Heidi's house when I went to visit her last year. She had it on her shelf, and I was like, oh, I would really like to read that, and took it and haven't read it. So I would like to read it so that I can give it back to her and also talk to her about it. It is called, I have to look at my paper here, In Order to Live. So this is a book about a young woman who fled from North Korea into South Korea and kind of the really complex and traumatic route that she had to take to get there. There's a lot about her experience going through that, and I have not read a story like that. I haven't read any stories from that sort of perspective before, and I really would like to. I expect this to be a difficult read. I am expecting that it's going to be heavy. I'm probably going to have to read through it slowly, but I think it obviously is a really worthwhile story, and I am looking forward to reading it, and that I want to learn more about her experiences and, hopefully gain some insight into what life was like for her. But like I said, I do expect that it's probably going to be a little bit of a heavier read, so I imagine I'll start that around the beginning of the month and stretch it out. Read it over however many days it takes to digest a story like that. But that is it. Those are all of the books that I have on the TBR for June. I am looking forward to reading all of them. Like I said, these are not books that I hear talked about as much. So if you have read any of them and you enjoyed or did not enjoy, then please let me know. I would love to hear about it. Or otherwise, you can just tell me what you are planning to read in June. If you want to read Legends and Lattes, don't forget you can join in the Discord, and we will definitely have a conversation going on there. I will see you with another video soon.